I never thought my own sister would sell us out for a pile of cash. That's not just a figure of speech. She literally destroyed our family for money. And the worst part, she did it with a smile, acting like she was saving us. My name's Ethan Miller, and this story isn't some distant tragedy you read about online. It's the story of how my sister Lauren turned our once loving home into a battlefield. And how karma made her pay in ways no one could have predicted. We grew up in a small town called Riverview Hills, where life was simple and slow. My parents ran a modest furniture store that had been in our family for generations. My father, a carpenter with hands rough as sandpaper, used to say, "Money comes and goes, Ethan. But family, that's the one thing you can't rebuild once it's broken." Lauren, on the other hand, used to roll her eyes whenever he said that. She always wanted more. More money, more recognition, more attention. Where I was content helping out in the shop and planning to expand it someday, Lauren had her sights set on luxury, city lights, designer handbags, and people who spoke in deals and percentages. She wasn't evil, not at first, just restless. Things started to change the year our mother fell sick. The medical bills began piling up, and Dad refused to close the shop even though it was barely breaking even. That's when Lauren came home one weekend, dressed like a corporate queen and smelling of expensive perfume, her eyes gleaming like she'd just found the solution to all our problems. "Dad," she said, dropping her designer purse on the table, "I have an offer for you." Those words should have been a warning. A property developer from the city, Edison Holdings, wanted to buy our shop and the 2 acres it sat on. The area was being turned into a luxury complex, and they were offering way more than the land was worth. Dad refused instantly. "This store is your grandfather's legacy," he said, voice trembling with pride. "I'll die before I sell it to some city sharks." Lauren didn't argue. Not that day. She just smiled and said, "Fine, Dad. But don't say I didn't try to help." That night, I found her sitting on the porch, staring at the moon, her phone glowing in her hand. "You know," she said, "we could fix everything if you just talked some sense into him." I shook my head. "You're not seeing what he sees, Lauren. This isn't about the shop. It's about family." She let a soft, bitter sound. "Family doesn't pay hospital bills, Ethan. Money does." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Mom's condition was getting worse. We needed help. Still, something about her tone unsettled me. Like she wasn't just trying to solve a problem, she was trying to win. A few weeks later, Dad got a notice in the mail. Apparently, the property had been signed into a joint ownership deal. The papers bore both his and Lauren's names. Only he never signed anything. When we confronted her, she didn't even deny it. "I just expedited the process," she said coolly. "You'll thank me later." Dad's face went pale. "You forged my signature." "It's not forgery if it's for the greater good," she shot back. "You're too emotional to make smart decisions anymore." The shouting that followed could have cracked the walls. I'd never seen my father cry before that day. Weeks turned into months. The store was demolished. The sign my grandfather carved with his bare hands lay shattered in a construction dumpster. Our mother passed away soon after, and I don't know if it was the illness or heartbreak that finally took her. Lauren didn't even come to the funeral. She sent flowers from her new penthouse in the city. That's when the silence between us began. 2 years passed. I now live in a small apartment working odd jobs to make ends meet. Lauren, on the other hand, has become a minor celebrity, young business genius, praised in magazines and talk shows. She talks about innovation, ambition, and breaking barriers. Never about family. Never about what she broke to get there. But lately strange things have been happening. I've been getting anonymous messages, old photos of our family, burned at the edges, a clipping of her company's logo with the words, "It always comes back around," scrawled across it in black ink. And last night, when I turned on the news, I saw her name again, not in the business section this time, but in the crime reports. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there long before everything fell apart. They weren't obvious at first, just whispers, small cracks in the foundation. Easy to ignore when you love someone, easy to explain away when it's family. But cracks, if you don't fix them, always spread. It started about a year before the shop was sold. Mom had just been diagnosed, and the hospital visits were becoming routine. I was helping Dad run the store during the day and spending nights at the hospital with her. Lauren, on the other hand, was working in the city. She'd come home on weekends with perfect hair, expensive shoes, and stories about rooftop bars and high-profile clients. She'd always been the star of the family. Mom would brag about her at church. Dad used to smile whenever she came through the door, like she was sunlight in human form. Me, I was the one who stayed, the reliable one, the one who didn't make the family proud in headlines, but kept the lights on. and at first I didn't mind. But things slowly started to feel off. One night, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. It was past midnight. The house was quiet, except for a faint murmur. I followed the sound and saw Lauren in the living room, sitting on the couch, talking on her phone in a low, urgent voice. "No, listen to me," she whispered. "He doesn't have to know yet. Just give me a little more time." I froze in the hallway. She wasn't talking like someone making weekend plans with friends. Her tone was sharp, calculated, like she was negotiating something. Before I could step forward, she turned around, eyes wide, caught off guard. Then, like a switch flipping, she plastered on a warm smile. "Ethan! Oh my God, you scared me. Who were you talking to?" I asked. "Nobody important," she said quickly, tucking her phone behind her back. "Just work stuff." I didn't push. I should have, but I didn't. I told myself she was stressed from work. That not everything was about us, but something in her eyes that night, something sly and cold, didn't sit right with me. Around that same time, Dad started treating Lauren like she was the only one who could fix things. Every time a new bill came in or the doctor said we needed to try a new treatment, Dad would turn to her. "Lauren's smart. She'll know what to do," he'd say. I'd be sitting right there, sweaty and exhausted from carrying furniture and dealing with customers all day. But it was never, "Ethan will handle it." It was always Lauren. Even when she wasn't around. I don't blame him, he loved her. She was his firstborn, the one who chased dreams he didn't have the chance to. But when I started noticing that she was encouraging it, leaning into his trust, soaking up every bit of it like sunlight, it stung in ways I didn't have words for. She'd walk into the room, and suddenly, I was invisible. I was the one keeping everything from collapsing, and she was the one getting the credit for being there. The biggest red flag came with the hospital bills. I was in charge of keeping track of payments. Every week, I'd set aside whatever the shop earned for Mom's treatment. One day, while balancing the numbers, I noticed something strange, a withdrawal, a big one, nearly $6. It wasn't a bill, it wasn't a hospital fee, it wasn't rent. I asked Dad about it. He frowned, confused, and said he hadn't touched the account. I didn't want to suspect her, I really didn't. But she was the only other person with access. That night, I cornered Lauren in the kitchen. "Did you take money from the shop account?" She raised an eyebrow, totally unbothered. "Relax, Ethan. It's not a big deal. I just borrowed it." "Borrowed it for what?" "Some investment stuff." "You wouldn't get it. We need that money for Mom's treatment," I said, my voice trembling. She sighed, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "And we'll have double of it once the deal closes." "I'm not stupid. What deal?" But she didn't answer. She just walked past me, grabbing her keys like nothing happened. That night, lying in bed, I tried to convince myself she knew what she was doing. That she'd never let anything happen to Mom. But the numbers didn't lie. She'd taken our lifeline and put it into something I didn't understand. And she didn't care enough to explain. As Mom's condition worsened, the strain on the family grew heavier. I was there every day, lifting, moving, fixing, paying. Lauren came home once every few weeks. Yet everyone treated her like the savior. I'd come back from a full day at the shop, covered in sawdust, and find Dad sitting in the living room, smiling at the sound of her voice on speakerphone. "Lauren said she's talking to some people about helping us," he'd say, like it was gospel. "She's got connections, Ethan, big connections." Meanwhile, I was falling apart silently, tired, broke, and scared. The lies were small at first, easy to miss. She'd say she was working late, but I'd see her tagged in photos at fancy bars. She'd say she was helping Mom, but I'd be the one sitting beside the hospital bed while she disappeared for hours. She promised to send money, but the bank account stayed empty. Each lie chipped away at my trust. But I didn't confront her. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was overwhelmed too. Maybe we were just dealing with pain differently. But deep down, I think I already knew. One night, after Mom's third surgery, I came home from the hospital at 3 a.m. The house was dark except for a light in Dad's study. I peeked in. Lauren was there. Not sleeping, not grieving, whispering. On the phone again. "He's already tired. He'll sign anything if it means helping Mom," she said softly. "No, I'll handle Ethan. He's not a problem." My chest tightened. "Handle me." "Not a problem." I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound. I should have stormed in, demanded answers. But I didn't. I just stood there, my hands shaking, listening to my sister, the person I trusted most, talk about me like I was an obstacle. It's a strange thing, watching someone you love slowly become a stranger. It doesn't happen all at once. It's like 1,000 tiny cuts you don't feel until you're bleeding. Lauren was smiling less at home. Her hugs felt hollow. When she looked at me, it wasn't warmth anymore, it was calculation. She'd started wearing sharper clothes, talking faster, checking her phone every 5 seconds. Like she was already halfway gone. I told myself she just wanted a better life, that she'd come back for us once things settled. But a part of me, the part I tried to silence, was already whispering the truth. She wasn't planning to come back. She was planning to cash out. A week before the forged papers showed up, Lauren came into the shop with a strange smile on her face. It wasn't joy, it was victory. "You should start thinking about what you want, Ethan," she said, resting a hand on my shoulder, "because everything's about to change." I didn't understand it then, but I remember her tone. Cold. Sure, like a storm on the horizon. And storms don't ask permission, they just hit. Some betrayals hit you like a knife in the back. But this one felt like a slow, quiet shattering from the inside out. I should have known. I did know somewhere deep down, but nothing prepares you for the moment when suspicion turns into truth. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels too heavy and the world too quiet. I was at the shop alone, restocking shelves when Dad walked in holding a thick envelope. His face was pale, like he'd seen a ghost. "Ethan," he said quietly, "we need to talk." He handed me the envelope without another word. Inside was a stack of legal papers, property agreements, sale contracts, and something that made my stomach twist into knots. The store, the land, everything, signed over, to Edison Holdings, and at the bottom, beneath my father's name, was Lauren Miller's signature. Only the signature above hers, the one that was supposed to be Dad's, wasn't real. He swallowed hard. "I didn't sign this, Ethan. She forged it." For a moment, I just stared at the papers. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. All the little red flags that I'd brushed off, the late-night calls, the missing money, the strange confidence in her voice, were suddenly no longer warnings, they were proof. My sister had sold us out, for money. Dad called her that evening. She didn't sound surprised, didn't even sound nervous. Just said, "I'll be there in an hour," like this was some minor misunderstanding. She showed up wearing a blazer, heels, and lipstick too sharp for a family talk. She looked more like a corporate negotiator than a daughter facing the father who raised her. "What the hell is this?" Lauren, I asked the moment she walked in, waving the papers at her. She didn't even look at me first. She looked at Dad, calm, collected. "It's called a business decision." "You forged his signature," I snapped. She tilted her head. "I didn't forge anything. I just helped him make the right choice." Dad slammed his hand against the table. The sound echoed through the kitchen like thunder. "Lauren, this was not your choice to make?" "No," she shot back, voice rising, "but someone had to make it." "You were too stubborn to see what needed to be done. The shop is drowning. Mom's medical bills are piling up. This was the only way. The stealing from your own family," I yelled. Her jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes, not guilt, defiance. "I didn't steal. I secured our future." As the argument spiraled, the whole truth came out. Lauren had been in talks with Edison Holdings for months. She'd promised them a clean transfer if they doubled the offer. Behind our backs, they paid her under the table to make it happen faster. She pocketed a 6-figure finder's fee. "I saved us," she insisted. "This money can pay off everything. Mom's treatment. Dad's debts, your little life here." I laughed bitterly. "Little life? That's what this is to you." She didn't answer. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I didn't do this for you, Ethan. I did it for me." It was like being punched in the gut. All those years growing up together, her holding my hand when I was scared, sharing midnight snacks, promising we'd always have each other's backs, meant nothing. To her, I was just a piece of property, a loose end to tie off. Dad pushed the papers back across the table. His hands were trembling. "You're not my daughter right now," he whispered. For a split second, something flickered across her face. But it wasn't regret, it was offense. Like she couldn't understand why we weren't thanking her for saving us. She turned to me. "Ethan, stop being dramatic. You can work for Edison, they'll probably keep you on for a while. Work for the people who stole our family legacy. The people she sold us to." "Get out," I said, my voice low. "Get out," she scoffed. "You're being childish." "No," I said. "You're being heartless." When she finally walked out, slamming the door behind her, the sound was final. Like family dying without a funeral. The next week was chaos. Edison Holdings moved fast. They always do, apparently. Trucks came, contractors, bulldozers. Within days, the walls my grandfather had built with his bare hands were reduced to rubble. I stood on the sidewalk, soaked in the pouring rain, watching strangers tear down a lifetime of memories. Lauren didn't show up. Of course she didn't. She was already living in the city, sitting on a fat check, smiling in photographs with the very people who'd gutted our legacy. Dad didn't talk much after that. He sat on the porch for hours every day, just staring at where the shop used to stand. I'd try to talk to him, but he'd just nod, eyes glazed over. It wasn't just a building that was gone. It was everything, and Lauren was the one who lit the match. I don't know how to describe what betrayal from family feels like. It's not a clean wound, it's not loud. It's quiet. Numbing. You keep waiting to wake up, waiting for someone to tell you it was all a mistake. But every time I turned on the news and saw her face, smiling like nothing happened, the knife twisted deeper. The girl who used to braid my hair when we were kids had sold us out like a stranger. And the worst part, she wasn't sorry. Not even a little. A month later I saw her on TV, a business interview. Lauren Miller, the young visionary who closed one of the year's most lucrative land deals. She sat there in a tailored suit, talking about opportunities and strategic decisions, as if she hadn't burned her family to the ground. Family is important, she said to the reporter. But sometimes, tough choices have to be made. I punched the wall so hard my knuckles split open. The reporter called her brilliant, ambitious, a role model. If only they knew. After the deal, after the demolition, after Dad stopped talking and Mom's empty room started collecting dust, I hit rock bottom. But here's the thing about rock bottom. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the sound of resolve forming. One night, sitting in the dark, staring at an old photo of us as kids, me and Lauren, muddy from building tree forts, I felt something cold settle inside me. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She might have stolen everything, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. Grief has a strange way of settling into your bones. At first it's loud, every breath feels like a scream. But then it goes quiet, it just sits there heavy, cold, unmoving. That's where I lived for months after Lauren betrayed us. In silence, the shop was gone. The house felt like a museum of everything we'd lost. And Dad was just a shadow of the man he used to be. He'd spend hours sitting on the porch, staring at the empty lot where our family legacy used to stand, as if looking hard enough might make it grow back. I tried to keep things moving, working small jobs, paying what bills I could, pretending like I was still part of something solid. But the truth was everything had cracked the day she signed those papers. And every night I lay awake replaying it all. Her calm smile, her cold words, that signature. She didn't just steal the shop. She stole the heart of our family. At first I avoided anything that reminded me of her. I'd turn off the TV when her face showed up in business segments, ignore her smug photos on magazine covers, pretend like she didn't exist. But pain has a way of mutating. What starts as grief eventually turns into something sharper. I started saving the newspaper clippings, watching the interviews in secret, studying her moves like a stranger, not a brother. She was growing fast. Edison Holdings had made her their golden star, the woman who could close impossible deals. She was buying properties left and right, wearing more expensive suits, posing for more cameras. But the more polished she became, the more distant she looked. Like a person who'd burned all her bridges, and was determined to pretend there was no smoke. I thought ignoring her would help. But every headline was a reminder she won, we lost. The turning point came on a cold night in late November. Dad had been coughing for days. He refused to see a doctor. Said he didn't want any more hospital visits. Not after what happened with Mom. I came home from work that evening to find him sitting in the dark, holding a photograph. It was one of the few things that survived the demolition. A faded picture of the shop in its early days. Dad in his 20s, grinning with sawdust on his shirt. Mom in her apron. Me and Lauren sitting on the counter with ice cream in our hands. I knelt beside him. "You should eat something?" I said softly. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the picture. Then he whispered something I'll never forget. "I built everything so you kids would have something to hold on to. But now it's like we were never here." He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad. He sounded empty. That hit me harder than anything Lauren had ever said. She didn't just take money. She erased our name. Our legacy. She made him feel like he'd lived his whole life for nothing. And something in me broke open. No, not broke. Hardened. I stood up, heart pounding. And for the first time in a long time I didn't feel numb. I felt something else. Hot, electric, alive. I wasn't gonna let her write the ending of our story. Not like this. The next morning I pulled out an old wooden box from the attic. Inside were all the shop's old records. Contracts, invoices, loan agreements, and most importantly, my grandfather's original land deed. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, flipping through every page, every scribbled note in Dad's handwriting. And the more I read, the more something became clear. Lauren had been smart, strategic, but she hadn't been careful. There were inconsistencies in the documents she forged, little details she'd overlooked in her rush to sell. A wrong initial here, A mismatched date there. A missing clause in the transfer of ownership. Small things but legal cracks. And cracks could break a foundation. My pulse quickened. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I had something, a thread, a way in. But determination doesn't erase pain. I still found myself walking by the empty lot every night. I'd stand there, listening to the wind whistle through the hollow space where our shop used to be. Some nights I'd imagine Mom standing at the door, smiling. Some nights I'd see Lauren, laughing, like she always did when she got away with something as a kid. I used to think she was just restless, that she wanted a bigger life. But now I saw it for what it was. She didn't just want more, she wanted everything, and she didn't care who she crushed to get it. That thought didn't make me cry anymore. It made me angry, the kind of quiet, clean anger that doesn't burn out, it builds. The real push came 2 weeks later. I was at a friend's place when a TV ad came on. Lauren, my sister, standing in front of the gleaming glass lobby of Edison Holdings. Riverview Hills is evolving, she said to the camera. We're not just building structures, we're building the future. Behind her in the background I caught sight of it, the lot. Our land. Only now, it was surrounded by construction cranes and luxury banners. And on one of those banners in massive, elegant letters, was her name. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would crack. She hadn't just sold the land, she branded it with her name. Like we never existed. That was it. That was the moment the hurt finally turned into fire. I went home that night and pulled out everything I had. Old records, emails, bank statements, every scrap of paper connected to the shop. I laid them out on the floor like a puzzle, and for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was getting ready for war. I remembered what Dad used to say, money comes and goes, Ethan. But family, that's the one thing you can't rebuild once it's broken. Lauren had broken it. But maybe I could make sure she never forgot what she destroyed. This wasn't about getting the shop back anymore. That chapter was gone. This was about taking back our dignity. Making sure the world saw her for what she really was. And maybe, just maybe, watching karma do its work. The next morning I took the cracked legal documents to a lawyer in town. A friend of Dad's from way back. A quiet man named Richard. He was old, but sharp as ever. He looked through the files slowly. His eyes narrowed at certain lines, flickered at others. Finally, he looked up at me and said, she was sloppy. This isn't airtight. My heart pounded. You mean? If we can prove she forged your father's signature and manipulated the contract terms, we can challenge the transfer. It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. For the first time in years, I saw a faint, dangerous light at the end of the tunnel. Hope, not soft or nanava, but hard-edged, sharp. Then let's do it, I said. Richard smiled faintly. Then buckle up, son. This is going to get ugly. Ugly was fine. Ugly meant she'd finally face something she couldn't buy her way out of. That night, I visited Mom's grave. The grass was still soft, the headstone cold beneath my fingertips. I'm gonna make this right, I whispered. Not for me. For Dad. For you. For everything she took. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a second, I swear it felt like she was listening. I left the graveyard with my shoulders squared and my jaw set. Lauren had started this war. But I was going to finish it. Once you make a decision to fight, the world suddenly fills with small, exact tasks. Revenge isn't a roar. It's 1,000 quiet, surgical moves stacked like dominoes. You have to be patient, precise, ruthless in your focus. I wasn't a vengeful man by nature. But the thing Lauren stole wasn't just wood and nails and a sign with our name on it. She stole a life, she stole my father's dignity. And that debt demanded repayment. Here's how I started. Richard, the lawyer, was my anchor. He knew the law's little seams and how to pry them open. But law alone doesn't dig up hidden bank transfers or coax confessions from people who've been paid to keep quiet. So Richard called in favors a retired forensic document examiner, an old bank clerk friend, who could point us to where the quiet transfers hide. Most importantly, a private investigator named Marta. Marta was all eyes and patience. She'd worked cases like this before. Family sales disguised as business deals, shell companies' offshore accounts. She smelled patterns other people didn't see. First rule, follow the money. Marta tracked Edison Holdings side accounts and found one of those ugly little things corporations love. An LLC with a meaningless name, registered to a P.O. box. The LLC had paid a consulting fee to a personal account that looked suspiciously like Lauren's. We subpoenaed bank statements. The numbers told the story loud and ugly. A series of wire transfers timed with Lauren's meetings in the city. One transfer, large, clean, went into an account Lauren had access to. We had people willing to say they'd seen her at the bank depositing envelopes. The forensic accountant tied dates and amounts to the time the forged documents were submitted. Paper doesn't lie, but signatures can be faked by clever people. We hired the document examiner. He studied the ink, pressure patterns, and the sequence of strokes. He pulled Dad's known signatures from decades of contracts in the attic box and compared them line by line. The result was clinical and devastating. The signature attributed to Dad on the transfer papers was inconsistent with his natural writing. There were tremors and hesitations. A forger's tell. We could now say with expert testimony that Dad's signature had been forged. Legal and financial proof is strong, but in court, corroboration kills doubt. Marta surveilled Lauren discreetly, meetings, late-night calls, handoffs at cafes. A contractor from Edison, loosened by a few $100s of kindness from Marta and the right questions, confessed under pressure that there had been a premium to expedite the sale. An Edison account manager, nervous and looking for a way out, handed over internal emails showing instructions to get this closed quietly, and a note about a finder's fee. We recorded one of Lauren's calls, legally, with a consent trick used inside the wiring of a staged consultation, where she thought she was speaking to a middleman. Her voice, clipped and confident, arranged details that lined up with the transfers. She spoke about making sure signatures are ready, and handling the old man. It wasn't an admission in black and white, but it was enough to paint the picture. You don't bust someone by yelling in the street. You make them move, and then you catch the movement. Lauren was arrogant. That became our alley. She loved the spotlight. She announced the grand opening of the Lauren Miller Plaza, a gala, champagne, donors, cameras. She'd be surrounded by people who would celebrate her vision. She'd be on stage, towering over the very land she'd stolen. We needed a place to expose her without giving her time to scrub servers, hide accounts, or buy silence. Richard filed the initial suit quietly. Enough to put pressure on Edison's legal team, but not enough to alert Lauren publicly. If a pre-trial subpoena hit Edison's servers, they'd be forced to preserve records. That would freeze the evidence before she could delete anything. The subpoena came the week before her gala. Then we planted a rumor through a couple of trusted contacts in the city press. Edison was exploring a public listing. Regulators were sniffing around. Panic is a dangerous thing for people who think money buys escape routes. In her panic, I knew she might try to tie up loose ends. Call people, make payments, even confess to someone she thought she could trust. We waited. I called an old friend who worked in PR at a business magazine, and fed them a tip. An anonymous whistleblower had indicated improprieties in a recent land deal. The magazine loved scandal. They started asking questions of Edison. Edison, in turn, began internal damage control. In a panic, one of their junior execs tried to quietly contact Lauren, asking her to handle an internal issue. She did. She met with him in a private suite at a hotel the night before the gala. Marta had eyes on the room. A hidden recorder captured the exchange. The exec, nervous, offered to move money to settle certain people. Lauren, brassy and practiced, suggested alternatives to cover the trail. She had rehearsed language for this very contingency. Move it through consultants, make it look legitimate, bury it in invoices. It was all there, her voice, her instructions, the proof of intent to obstruct. All the while, Lauren remained publicly untouchable. Interviews, magazine features, fundraising events, she smiled for every camera. The city loved the story of a hometown girl who made it. She believed herself untouchable, because money and PR had taught her how to look untouchable. That was the worst part. She still felt in control. She still thought she'd bought the world. But the legal noose was tightening. Evidence was piling up in Richard's hands: bank traces, expert testimony, recorded meetings, internal Edison emails. We weren't just ready to sue. We were ready to take her into the light. The night before the gala, Richard looked at me and said, "Tomorrow, we file for an emergency injunction. The court will either pause the plaza's opening or force Edison to produce all records publicly. If they refuse, the press will eat them alive." My heart hammered. For months I'd been planning, gathering, waiting. Now everything converged on a single day: the ribbon, cutting, the cameras, the toast. I pictured Lauren standing on the stage, pouring champagne over the podium, telling everyone how Riverview Hills had transformed. I pictured Dad somewhere, watching on TV, not knowing the truth was about to be dragged into the light. We had to be ready to move fast. To expose, to make sure the world saw her not as a visionary but as what she was, someone who traded her family for a ledger entry. When I went to bed that night, I didn't sleep. I wrote down every name, every piece of evidence, every witness. I rehearsed the moment in my head 100 different ways. Dawn came and the city hummed with excitement about the plaza. The gala tents went up, guests arrived in gowns, photographers camped at the curb. I drove there with a folder of papers in my lap and a stubborn kind of courage in my chest. The stage was set, the trap was set. All that was left was to pull the string. The morning of the gala felt like a movie set. White tents, string lights, a red carpet that cut through mud where our street had been, cameras, reporters, a brass band that played something too cheerful for the occasion. The whole city had turned up to celebrate. The Lauren Miller Plaza. Banners with her name fluttered in the wind like triumphant flags. I held my folder so tight the edges dug into my palm. Inside, expert reports, bank statements, recorded calls, internal emails, witness statements, the whole ugly truth bundled into a legal paper trail Richard had spent sleepless nights perfecting. Marta sat beside me in the car, her face calm as a surgeon's. Richard's eyes were sharp. He'd been up all night, tuning every piece of evidence so nothing could be dismissed as speculation. We were a quiet storm. We arrived as the caterers were finishing the canapés. Lauren swept past us in a dress that glittered like a promise. Her smile was bright, practiced, like someone who'd rehearsed triumph 1,000 times. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and didn't care. The plaza's stage was a glass and steel altar. At its center, a crystal podium with a ribbon draped across. The mayor hugged Lauren like she'd built the city with her own 2 hands. Flashbulbs popped, champagne corks clipped, people cheered. Then Richard rose from the crowd like a man stepping into sunlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into a microphone he'd borrowed from a reporter, "I'm Richard Hargreaves, counsel to the Miller family." His voice cut through the music. People turned, wine glasses tilted and stilled. For a second the world narrowed. He spoke plainly, not theatrically. "We have filed an emergency injunction against Edison Holdings and Ms. Lauren Miller to halt the opening of this plaza. We have evidence of forgery, fraudulent transfers, and willful obstruction of justice." The band's music faltered. Lauren's smile flickered. The mayor's face drained. Cameras pivoted toward us like animals sensing blood. Richard didn't need to shout. He let the folder do the heavy lifting. He handed the microphone to the court liaison, an anxious-looking woman who'd been roped into this by a reporter. And within minutes a court order was read aloud. Temporary restraining order, records preservation, an immediate freeze on all assets related to the transaction. You could sense the air change, like a stage curtain dropping mid-performance. People murmured. A reporter shouted a question. Someone tried to FOG feign of glamour. Lauren moved first. She glided to the microphone, laugh rehearsed and brittle. "This is obviously an attempt to derail progress." She began, but she didn't finish. Marta's voice cut into the live feed, a quiet, controlled narration of the first bombshell. "We have bank transfers connecting Edison Holdings to a consulting account that was routed into accounts Lauren could access. We have a forensic analysis showing your father's signature was not genuine." A hush so complete it made the server shiver. Then the recordings played. First, a clip of Lauren's pleasant, patronizing voice saying, "Make sure the signatures are ready." Then a second clip, a contract exec from Edison nervously confirming payments to a shell LLC. Then the forensic report, a 30-second animation showing the signature strokes, the trimmers, the mismatch. The cameras ate it up. Alev News Chiron crawled across every screen. Lauren's face crumbled, not elegantly, but in a way that made people see the truth beneath her makeup. She tried the PR moves, smile, deflection, indignation. She accused us of a smear campaign. She called us desperate, but words were paper, thin when a judge's order and a stack of cold, irrefutable documents were being waved at the world. Then the phone calls started. Edison's board in emergency session, their PR team scrambling, donors asking to be removed from the gala guest list. Investors hate uncertainty, especially when criminal allegations land in their lap. Within the hour, the plaza's lead investor froze funding. A major sponsor pulled their logo. The gala's caterers began packing up, as if they could wash away the scandal with steam and trays. Inside, Lauren was no longer the visionary, she was the accused. The climax wasn't a single cinematic moment, it was a series of collapses. First, her endorsements disappeared like footprints under rain. Then Edison's stock, if they had public shares, took a sharp dip when word leaked to the markets. Articles began to appear suggesting systemic corruption. Regulators sent people in suits to Edison's headquarters. The city announced it would pause all permits while an inquiry proceeded. But the most brutal blow was personal. A live interview aired on the local morning show. They put her on in a tiny studio, all cameras and harsh light. The host asked the only question that mattered. "Ms. Miller, did you forge your father's signature?" There was a beat of silence that felt like a long, cold moment you hold your breath through. Her mouth opened, closed, then she said, "No." The word was small, shaky. The recording of her voice arranging payments played back. People heard the contradiction. Viewers on social feeds were already calling for her head. A former contractor, coaxed gently by Marta and moved by a conscience pricked by guilt and beer, came forward on camera to describe a hush money payment, an Edison XX leaked email, intended to be private. confirmed the internal instruction to get this closed quietly. It all threaded together like a noose. At the edge of the crowd, Dad watched the live feed on a borrowed phone. He didn't stand, he didn't scream. He folded like a man who'd finally let himself feel a long-denied thing, relief, maybe, or closure. His shoulders, which had been shrunk by weeks of grief, seemed to loosen. He put a hand on my arm. No words. Just a look that said thank you. I didn't gloat. I couldn't. The price of what we'd lost was too high. But watching Lauren's empire unravel, watching the face that once beamed in photo spreads collapse under the weight of her own choices, felt like a kind of justice. Not the dramatic, cinematic revenge you see in movies where fireworks follow a confession. This was a slow, legal unthreading of everything she had built on someone else's life. It got uglier. The police showed up to take an initial statement. Regulatory auditors combed through Edison's contracts. The city council convened. The plaza's ribbon stayed tied, untouched and shamed. Lauren sat on the curb outside the plaza, heels sunk in mud, mascara running. The cameras didn't leave her. The mayor issued a statement distancing the city from Edison. A small group of protesters, former customers, neighbors, people who remembered the sign with my grandfather's name, gathered at the site, chanting for accountability. Someone smashed a small commemorative plaque with her name. Pieces flew like confetti. By the end of the day, Lauren's phone had rung off the hook with subpoenas, frightened investors, and journalists. Her PR handler texted a list of approved statements that read like a confession dressed in spin. No one called to ask how Dad was doing. When the dust settled, a prosecutor told Richard they were opening a criminal inquiry, forgery, fraud, conspiracy. It was the legal thunderbolt we'd hoped for, less about revenge than about ensuring the truth led to consequences Lauren couldn't buy. That night, I walked the perimeter of the plaza. The scaffolding gleamed under floodlights, but the place felt hollow. The banners with her name had been taken down. Someone painted Remember US on a wall where windows would go. I thought of my grandfather carving letters into wood, the way his hands traced every curve. I thought of Dad, quieter now but not broken beyond repair. I thought of Mom, and how the end of her life had been used as a bargaining chip. I didn't dance in victory. I placed my palm against a splintered piece of wood, one of the few salvaged artifacts Richard had managed to get from the demolition dump, and whispered, "We're not gone." Karma hadn't come down like lightning. It had been a slow, methodical unraveling, legal, public, humiliating, just enough to make Lauren see the consequences of turning family into coin. She had traded our name for a ledger entry. The ledger had become public. And now the city, the courts, and time would do what I could not make sure she remembered what she'd destroyed. Rain came 2 days after the gala, washing away the confetti, the champagne stains, and the echoes of applause that had never quite happened. It was strange how quickly a monument could turn into a cautionary tale. The Lauren Miller Plaza sign was gone. In its place stood a plywood barrier wrapped in caution tape, damp with rain, covered in graffiti scrawled by angry hands. Justice for the Millers. You can't buy legacy. She forgot where she came from. For years, that land had been the beating heart of our family. Then, for a short, bitter time, it was her trophy. Now it was a battlefield she'd lost, and me. For the first time since the betrayal, I could breathe. The legal storm after the gala was brutal. For Lauren, not for me. Edison Holdings cut all ties with her before the week was over. They issued a public statement calling her actions a personal matter and assuring investors they'd no prior knowledge of the forged documents. But leaked internal emails told a different story, and the city wasn't buying it. Edison's reputation crumbled right alongside hers. The court froze her accounts pending investigation. Her penthouse was seized. The luxury car she loved showing off on social media, auctioned off to pay legal fees. The designer dresses she wore on magazine covers, shoved into cardboard boxes in evidence storage. But the worst part wasn't the financial collapse, it was the silence. The friends who used to cling to her for status stopped answering her calls. Sponsors withdrew. Reporters who once celebrated her brilliance now used words like fraud, liar, and traitor. Her name, the one she'd stamped across banners and contracts, had become toxic. I'll never forget the day we finally stood in court. Lauren in a dark suit, no makeup, eyes dulled. Like all the shine she'd borrowed from money had finally burned out. Dad sat beside me, his cane tapping softly against the courtroom floor, his hand steady for the first time in years. The prosecutor laid it out cleanly: forgery of a legal document, fraudulent transfer of inherited property, conspiracy with corporate partners to bypass consent laws, financial gain through illegal means. There was no drama in the judge's voice, no swelling music, no cinematic gasp, just facts. Cold, sharp, unshakable. When the recording of her voice played, the one where she said, "Make sure the signatures are ready," I watched something flicker across her face. Not shock. Not anger. Just resignation, like a woman realizing the game she thought she controlled had finally turned against her. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared down at the table, as if facing a storm she'd once thought she was immune to. The verdict came down guilty on multiple counts. A significant prison sentence. Heavy restitution. But even more brutal than the years behind bars was the permanent stain on her name. No company would hire her. No investor would touch her. The empire she built on betrayal had turned to ash. The land, after months of legal maneuvering, was returned to our family. It wasn't the same. The shop was gone, replaced by half-built steel frames and concrete foundations. But Dad didn't want to rebuild the way it was. He can't bring back the past, he told me one night, looking out over the lot. But you can build something honest on top of it. So, we did. Not a fancy plaza, not a chain store, just a small, clean building with wide windows and a simple wooden sign. Miller and Son. Family carpentry. The wood came from old beams that had survived the demolition. Scarred, but strong, like us. Neighbors showed up on opening day with flowers and pie. People who'd known my grandfather came to shake Dad's hand. And for the first time since Mom's passing, I saw a real smile on his face. Not forced, not fragile. Real. We didn't hear from Lauren directly again. She sent no apology, no letter, no call. But I knew from the news, she was stripped of everything she'd built with our name. In prison. The same people who used to cheer her name on talk shows now whispered it with contempt. The tabloids called her, the hare who sold her soul. I didn't need to see her to know the weight of that title was heavier than any sentence a judge could give. Some nights, though, I'd stand outside the shop and look at the moon, the same way she used to all those years ago when she first said, "Family doesn't pay hospital bills. Money does," she had won. For a time. But karma doesn't run on our schedule. It takes its time, then hits harder than anyone expects. I didn't become rich from any of this. I didn't want to. I just wanted our name back. Our dignity, our peace. The town started referring to us again with respect, not pity. Customers came back. Kids ran around the shop like we once did. And Dad's laugh, God, that sound, filled the air again. One evening, I stood by Mom's grave with a handful of sawdust in my palm, letting it scatter into the wind. "We're home again," I whispered. "And she can't take that away anymore." The wind was cool, gentle, and for the first time, the ache in my chest didn't hurt like a wound. It felt like a scar. Something healed but not forgotten. You know what's funny? All those years, Lauren believed the only thing that mattered was money. She believed family was a liability. She believed loyalty was optional. But when everything collapsed, money was the first to abandon her. And family, the thing she betrayed, was the one thing she couldn't buy back. That's karma. It doesn't knock, it doesn't call ahead. It just shows up when you least expect it, and it collects. If you've made it this far, maybe you know what betrayal feels like. Maybe it came from someone you trusted. A friend, a partner, a sibling. Maybe it broke something inside you that felt impossible to fix. I know that feeling, I lived it. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself, your dignity, your name, your peace. Karma took care of Lauren in a way I never could have. All I had to do was stand in the truth long enough for it to find her. So if you've ever been betrayed, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Because this isn't just my story, it's ours. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, hit that subscribe button. Because what goes around always comes back around.